Now we are joined by former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. You know him well. Mick, huge first week here for the Team Trump. What have you made of this incredible just onslaught of executive orders, of policy changes, of DEI axing, of everything else? As somebody who has served there with President Trump in the first Trump term, how do you think he's going as Trump 2.0?
Yeah, James, I'll pull the curtain back on how the show works a little bit for your viewers because there's no reason for them to know this. But every week, your team sends me a list of possible topics on a day or two before we do this, just so I can do a little bit of research. They don't give me the questions, but they give me the topics. And I think the list today was about 3 pages long of possible topics that we could talk about in the first week of the Trump administration. So it's been great. Look, it's exactly what you and I have talked about now for months, which is what would Trump 2.0 look like compared to Trump 1.0. And the difference is this: they're ready. This team has been working together now, some of them since Trump left office in 2021, and they've hit the ground running. I was talking to Sean Spicer, who's a friend of your show from time to time, and Sean and I recalled, and we didn't really recognize until this week, that when we joined the administration together back in 2017, we didn't even meet each other for the first time until February of 2017. So you can imagine how hard it is for a team to gel when they're meeting a month after the president is sworn in. Now the team has been working together as a team for a long time, and you're starting to see the payoff from that, the speed with which they have moved. He's already, I think, signed as many executive orders in the first week as he did in the previous 4 years. They are just of massive import on serious matters. It's been a nonstop change in direction. I'll close with this. How do I sum it up for people? The man is simply doing what he said he was going to do, and that's refreshing for a lot of American voters. There's a lot of politicians who say one thing and they get in office to give excuses for why they can't do it. Donald Trump's actually doing exactly what he told people that he would do when they voted for him.
It's exactly what they keep saying: promises made, promises kept. But the Democrats now are starting to push back in all sorts of different ways. Probably the first front now is some of these confirmation hearings. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General designate, she has had her confirmation delayed. What's happening there?
Yeah, that's part of the unique rules of the Senate. The Democrats have been able to delay her vote for about 10 days. The rumor in Washington is that violates a gentleman's agreement between the parties on how to handle these confirmations. It also raises the specter of whether or not Senate Republicans will now start to be more inclined to look at Trump's request to do these these actual recess appointments. So the Democrats really are playing with fire. Here in the next 24 hours, we do expect to have confirmation votes for maybe Hegseth, although he's had a couple steps back today, for Russ Vought at OMB, perhaps for Sean Duffy at the DOT. So it looks like by the time your audience sees this, Trump will have at least a couple more of his cabinet positions in place, but it's going to be a long slog, as it is most times with the Senate.
Well, you mentioned Pete Hegseth, the nominee for the Secretary of Defense here. And what I've been fascinated by with this is how they've tried to rerun the Kavanaugh playbook, for lack of a better term. You know, he's a drunk, he's this, he's that. And it's the same sort of thing that they did with Kavanaugh at the Supreme Court. But now we've also seen a lot of, I think, circumstantial evidence that the Democrats have been coordinating with NBC and particularly the New York Times to put out smear stories about Hegseth. Some of them are so ridiculous, like they're claiming, oh, well, he drinks too much at family gatherings, but frankly, how else are you supposed to get through them? What do you make of the way that Pete Hegseth is being treated, and will the Republicans get over this in the same way they got over with Kavanaugh?
Yeah, look, I've been through the humiliation known as Senate confirmation. It's one of the worst possible professional experiences you can have. James, what it is essentially you are charged by law to write down everything you might have done wrong since you were 18 years old. I'm not making that up. Then you give it to the FBI, and they do all the sorts of research on it they can, and then they give that report to your 24-year-old progressive political enemies. There's a new affidavit out in the last 24 hours about Pete Hegseth related to his second marriage. I'm absolutely convinced that there was a 25-year-old staffer working for some progressive senator who was on the phone with this woman, harassing her every single day until she gave them an affidavit so that they had some ammunition against Hegseth. It's a nasty, nasty business. It's not advise and consent. It's extort and delay. And it's really horrible. The Senate's going to have to do something to fix it. They're not going to fix it right now, but to go through this is miserable. Here's the bottom line, is that as of this conversation right now, it looks like there are at least two Republicans, two women who have said they're going to vote against Hegseth, or at least can't vote for him. That's a vote against him. And that leaves a margin of only two. He can lose one more. If he loses one more, that's a 50-50 vote in the Senate, and then Vice President J.D. Vance will be the tiebreaker. But if he loses two more, the confirmation will go down. I don't foresee that. I think there's a chance it's a 50-50 vote. I've been there myself. I was a 51-49 vote. It's a nerve-wracking process, but it's going to be down to the wire, I think, for Pete Hegseth. Ultimately, I think he gets confirmed, but it's been a horrible process that does nothing but continue to poison the water in Washington, D.C.
Well, Mick, you're 100-0 with us here at the U.S. Report, just so you know. But I also want to talk, too, about some of the other controversy around the pardons. And, you know, I found it so amazing that there was outrage around some of the January 6 rioters' pardons. And, you know, I can understand why some people would be upset about that. But there was far less from the left about Joe Biden not just pardoning preemptively his whole family, which seems to me like, at best, an admission that the justice system is indeed politicized, but also, you know, a number of violent murderers, including somebody who killed two FBI agents. And there's been far little outrage about this. I just think that is absolutely appalling in a horrendous way for Joe Biden to go out.
It is, James, but here's the issue. It's a self-inflicted wound by the Trump administration. All they had to do was pardon the nonviolent people now and then say, we're going to come back to everybody else. And they would have stayed out of the way of the conversation about what Biden had just done. Keep in mind, they did this on back-to-back days. Biden did it as he was walking out the door, and then Trump did it as he was walking in the door, and Trump sort of stepped on the message. The discussion should have been about what Biden just did. You mentioned some great examples. I'll add another one to the list. He pardoned Anthony Fauci. Everybody knows that. You look at the details. He pardoned Anthony Fauci for everything in the world beginning on January 1st, 2014. Really? 2014? COVID didn't raise its head until January of 2020. So what's the magic of that date? What was Tony Fauci doing for 6 years before COVID that merits a presidential pardon? That is what the story should be about. But because the Trump team decided to go ahead and pardon even the violent offenders, that became the story. Look, you can have a debate about it. Differing reasonable people are going to disagree about those pardons. I'm looking at it purely from the political and media standpoint. The Trump decision ended up crowding out the coverage that should have properly gone to these horrible, horrible decisions that Joe Biden made as he was leaving office.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I think probably the two canceled each other out politically. But before I let you go, I also want to talk about Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Apparently, he is going to visit Panama as early as next week, and he's also going to hit Guatemala, El Salvador, Costa Rica, and the Dominican Republic. Now, everybody is sort of talking about Panama because there's been all that talk about the canal. Do you think there may be some discussion about revisiting the treaty that Jimmy Carter signed that gave the canal away, I think, for $1?
Sure. I think that conversation bears taking place in a context. Why is he going to these places? This is in my guess. It's an educated guess. This is about China. This is about reestablishing our sort of dominance, our hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, of countering China's attempts to make inroads. Panama is certainly front and center in terms of the Chinese efforts right now, but China has been active in Latin and Central America for a long time. And there's a reason I think you're seeing Marco go down to this part of the world. And it's not just because he's a fluent Spanish speaker and can speak to people in their own language. It's because we are taking care of business here at home. And this is part of the larger efforts by this administration to start to aggressively push back on Chinese sort of engagement here in the Western Hemisphere. It doesn't surprise me. I think there'll be a very candid and very fun conversation regarding the canal. But yeah, it's the right conversation to have at the right time. The Panamanians are supposed to be our folks, not the Chinese folks.
Mick, we're going to have to leave it there, but I promise you next week we're going to pick that up, and I want to have a deep dive about the Monroe Doctrine and what's going to happen around this hemisphere. Thank you so much for your time.